Dan, we know what the Trump version of this might look like, especially with this TikTok deal. But what if Biden were elected?
I think there's a lot of things. The biggest obvious one is on the tech side when it comes to antitrust policy, right? You've already got these investigations into Google and Apple and Amazon and Facebook, the hearings last month. I think, a Biden administration, although they have not been terribly explicit, it would seem to be probably harder for some of those companies to make acquisitions. And you could see that kind of go through the entire ecosystem. For example, Amy Klobuchar, who theoretically could be part of this administration, she objected to Uber going and buying Postmates. So I think you could see a lot of action on the antitrust side.
Yeah, and I guess antitrust is one thing, and it's often somewhat after the fact, although in Uber's case, it sounds like people were pretty involved during the negotiations and making clear what was and wasn't acceptable. So all of this would be much stepped up from what we've experienced over the last kind of 10 or 15 years, where deal making was largely left alone or dealt with afterwards, right?
Correct. Yeah. And I'd say for the last 10 or 15 years, probably pre-Trump, right? Because right. President Trump's been fairly involved in it. Yeah. Look, deal makers have always known that, a new president or a new control of Congress is going to impact tax policy or immigration policy or trade policy. And that's always been par for the course. But this is much more, for lack of a better term, activist, and particularly in the Trump administration. And what we've seen, TikTok is the most obvious example of it, and including that kind of extortion fee that he wants from anyone who buys TikTok. But honestly, been very involved in other deals as well, stepped up CFIUS activity. Clearly, in addition to the big tech stuff, really anything relating to China and acquisitions.
Right. So let's talk about TikTok. How does this play out? They don't have a ton of time left. Is it down to Microsoft and Oracle?
I think it's down to Microsoft. I have a very hard time seeing Oracle as anything but kind of leverage that's being used by President Trump to help maybe get a better deal out of Microsoft or to maybe kind of push Microsoft along a little bit. I could be wrong. Oracle could certainly do it. Everybody knows it doesn't seem to make a lot of strategic sense, at least on the surface. And then there's also the time factor. Microsoft spent, the first several weeks of this process, of the initial process, really just dealing with the politics of the White House before it even began negotiating with ByteDance, which is the company that owns TikTok. There isn't that much time. The only counter would be that Oracle, because of Larry Ellison, because of Safra Catz, does have very tight relationships with the White House. So maybe it could get through that faster than Microsoft could.
This is a whole throwback era, isn't it? I mean, when was the previous era that we saw a president so involved with corporate America like this?
I mean, not in my lifetime, at least not covering deals, and I've been doing this for 20 years. Nothing close to this. Now, look, there have been individual transactions, but look, the TikTok thing is truly unique. I don't think we have ever quite seen something like this ever. And that's not to say that there haven't been deals that a White House, through CFIUS or other actions, antitrust action with their DOJ, has tried to block or tried to renegotiate or tried to get divestitures, tied to. But this is a whole different sort of animal. And particularly, the shot clock that Trump created, which is really out of thin air. There's no particular reason for 45 days as opposed to 60 or 90.
And yet there seems to be not a ton of pushback by the public, would you say? And I wonder what that opens the door to in the future.
Well, there's not a lot of pushback because TikTok's still on everybody's phones and it's working. We're day 45 to come, and Oracle or Microsoft didn't have a deal in place with ByteDance, which is what they need to get. And Trump actually followed through with his threat. I could see some pushback. It's unclear whether he would follow through with that threat or not. It would be a pretty bold move to take off a social media app loved by tens, if not hundreds of millions of Americans just a few weeks before an election.